In a continued effort to try and diversify Guam's economy, a study was commissioned by the governor and the Guam Economic Development Authority on the potential for an additive manufacturing industry here. The feasibility study was conducted by Astro America, a nonprofit group that consults on the use of AM, especially in the defense sector. It found that the island has the basic building blocks for establishing a high-tech manufacturing sector, and that Guam could develop into a source of spare parts built on demand to service fleets of military ships, aircraft, and vehicles. Astro is now working with Guam's Bureau of Statistics and Planning on phase 2 of the assessment to develop an implementation plan due later this year. What exactly is additive manufacturing, and what is its potential in diversifying the local economy? We'll talk with Astro president and co-founder Neil Oranger. Day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of The Hub. I'm Nestor Lecanto, and our guest this week is Neil Oranger, who is the president of Astro America. Neil, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Before we get into the discussion about the feasibility study for 3D additive manufacturing that you did for the Guam Economic Development Authority, first of all, tell us a little bit about your background and what Astro America does.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. I actually have spent most of my career in government. I guess my introduction to 3D printing, which I guess is relevant here, was when I was the director of manufacturing for the U.S. Department of Defense. I was a political appointee for President Obama in the Pentagon. And so my task was at the Department of Defense to help make sure that the United States military had uninterrupted supplies of critical goods and services. So I actually ran different kinds of programs that would invest in manufacturing technology that would make sure that we drove down weapon system costs and drive down delivery time for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to use. And then from there, I bounced around in the Obama administration, spent some time at the U.S. Department of Commerce before leaving and going into this incredible industry, as you said, additive manufacturing or 3D printing. So I worked for actually the inventor of 3D printing, a guy named Chuck Hull, at a company called 3D Systems, and then left and worked for General Electric before starting up a nonprofit. So Astro America, or the Applied Science and Technology Research Organization of America, we specialize as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization advising government agencies and the general public on manufacturing technology and manufacturing policy that advances the nation's interests. And so we're really excited about trying to determine whether or not there's a feasible way to help Guam and the governor of Guam's agenda to diversify the economy and help overcome logistical challenges. And so that's what brought us to Guam back in November.
All right. And if for our viewers out there who are like me, who know very little about additive manufacturing, tell us more about that in the 3D printing. Because I know it's been around for about a decade, yeah?
It's been around actually for 40 years.
Okay.
So Chuck Hull invented it back in '87, and it's been sort of growing since then. So imagine that you've got a computer file, and you have designed this particular geometry. And once you've designed it on your computer, you convert it into a format. You know, when you use a Word document, it's a doc, or use Adobe, it's a PDF, right? Well, in the case of, for whatever reason, in the case of 3D printing, it's called an STL. So you convert a CAD drawing, a computer-aided design 3D drawing, into a STL. And what that does is it virtually slices that design into little two-dimensional slices. That is then sent to a machine, a 3D printer, and the 3D printer deposits material, and it's at each layer that's been sliced, and it's fused together. So let's take a process like metal laser powder bed fusion. So you start out with powder, metal powder. It's crazy. You start out with just a table of powder, and a laser comes down, and it fuses that powder together into geometries you just can't get in any other way. And for this reason, and the reason why I went to General Electric, GE is the largest jet engine manufacturer in the world. And they've started to make jet engine parts using 3D printing because they get so much more efficiency. They went from a fuel injector that had 24 individual components sourced from all over the world. And now they're able to make this design that is 25% more fuel efficient, and only it went from 24 parts down to one part that you could 3D print in a printer. And there are all kinds of interesting stories like this. If you've ever heard of Invisalign, you know, those dental aligners, that's done by 3D printing. 99% of all hearing aids are 3D printed. So there's a whole host of great cases. When you go and get a titanium implant for your hip or your knee, the reason why those titanium implants are 3D printed is it's the only way you can make a porous titanium part. And of course, having those holes in that titanium part helps stimulate bone growth. But what we wanted to talk about in Guam was the challenges that not only the military was having, but also in the civilian world in addressing some of those supply chain issues. How long does it take to order a part to fix a car, and especially during COVID when there were all kinds of supply chain issues? Well, imagine if you could actually, instead of waiting for a part to be shipped from, you know, God knows where, right? What if we could set up a actual set of 3D printers on island and be able to, you know, get a digital file, so you have your part in digital form, you press the print button, and you get your part on demand. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but the idea is that Guam could be an incredible test bed for helping establish just-in-time manufacturing and address all kinds of challenges that I know, based on our analysis, has been of concern for many years. And of course, COVID has only exacerbated these things. And of course, the military buildup, they're going to be looking for ways to quickly get replacement parts. And we thought this might be an interesting opportunity.
All right, Neil, we got to take a quick break, but I want to get into more in-depth on that feasibility study. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Neil Oringer of Astro America. Don't go away. Okay, we're back with Neil Oringer, who is the president of Astro America, and we're talking additive manufacturing, 3D printing. And Neil's company did a feasibility study for GIDA, the Guam Economic Development Authority, of course. Neil, tell us a little bit more about that feasibility study. What were you looking at? And tell us about some of the recommendations that came out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to say, first of all, it was an absolute pleasure doing this phase one analysis. And mainly it was because we had an opportunity to learn from and meet a whole host of people that we interacted with prior to coming to Guam, then when we were in Guam, and now continuing the conversation. So what we understood going into this, especially when we started the conversations with the government of Guam, was that the economy in Guam is dominated by two basic sectors. You have the military and you have tourism. And of course, maybe you could overlay that with a third major industry that's related to both, which is, of course, construction or civil engineering. And of course, during COVID, certainly the tourism industry has lagged behind. So we went into Guam trying to determine whether or not there was any way possible to introduce a advanced manufacturing technique that is very complicated and has taken a couple of decades to actually hone here in in the States, in the continental US, as well as in Europe. And what we concluded was actually, in fact, Guam has fundamental building blocks upon which we can actually create such a sector. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But if we have a focused, continuous adherence to a good strategy, it's possible. And there are so many great things that can happen from there. So what we looked at was, number one, was there a good workforce development infrastructure? And oh my gosh, I mean, getting to know the folks at the Guam Community College, as well as the folks in industry who partner with Guam Community College. And what was wonderful was to see that interaction, make sure that the kinds of skills that are being developed are relevant to the kinds of sectors that exist on island. Folks at Cabris Marine and other companies that work with the community college to develop boot camps, they call them, I think is a really exceptional model, and it seems to be working. So we enjoyed getting to know the folks at the community college. University of Guam. Not only is University of Guam a terrific higher education institution, but what we were really looking for in this particular case was there infrastructure to conduct research and receive federal grants to do sophisticated research. Now, University of Guam doesn't necessarily have a mechanical engineering department. There is a partnership with the University of Hawaii, and it's like a 2-year in Guam and 2 years in Hawaii. But, you know, my concern, having looked at some of the census data, is that a lot of times what folks will do is they may have an opportunity to get an education or get a job off island, and then they don't come back. What's happening here? So
Exactly.
we wanted to figure out an alternative approach here, especially if our goal is to establish something that's going to be long-term and sustainable. Well, we've been looking at a potential partnership with key universities that specialize in additive manufacturing technology. One being the Colorado School of Mines, terrific university, and they have actually suggested that they'd like to be part of a consortium, perhaps with other universities, maybe in that hemisphere, maybe with Australian institutions and others, to set up satellite centers together with the University of Guam. Finally, we talked to folks about where was that demand pull? Because the worst thing we could do is put together some $1 million machines, get them over to Guam, and just have them sit there and collect dust. So we were looking at where the potential demand is. Well, certainly the military buildup is going to contribute considerably to at least preliminary seed funding and help here. So you've got a submarine presence in Guam. You've got the Guam detachment of Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard and intermediate maintenance facility. Cabris Marine is a terrific supplier to the military Sea Lift Command. And then, of course, you have the Air Force Base, the Marine Corps is coming in droves, Missile Defense Agency. So DoD is really building up there. And so we believe that there's actually considerable interest from the Department of Defense. And when I say we believe, I should say we have pretty well-informed ideas about, having talked to a lot of folks here in Washington, D.C., as well as in Guam, about some concepts and collaboration that we can start advancing right now to set up a capability in Guam. But we wouldn't want to stop there. One of the interesting things I've been fascinated by is how active folks are in various task forces in Guam. One of them being not only a diversification task force, but there's a task force associated with transshipment. Well, gosh, what better way to sell to folks that you could set up your Asia operations on U.S. soil. You could come to Guam, start manufacturing goods and services, but have the benefit of having the Guam judicial system, the U.S. system, and still be able to reach Asian markets. And so there's a lot of interest in seeing what we can do to set up that kind of activity. So we think that there's a lot of excitement around this. And so we just initiated phase 2 of our study. And that's actually working with the with BSP, Bureau of Statistics and Programs. And this is really about how do we identify both the total addressable market, who's going to buy stuff, and second, how are we going to start establishing a plan to get funding to build this? And we have 3 tenets to that plan that we're starting to identify in phase two. One being, could we create a soft landing? Could we convince companies that make parts using 3D printers to relocate or locate people and machines and capabilities in Guam? Maybe we could set up an incubator space that both startup companies as well as these kinds of contract manufacturers could set up shop. Two, you can't sell a part to Boeing or to United Airlines to go on an airplane unless you can validate that that part's going to be safe. So you need a lab, and we would set up a metallography lab at the University of Guam to test and evaluate parts to validate it. And then third is a workforce development center in concert with the various universities I mentioned and Guam Community College. And we think that three-pillar approach is going to both attract a lot of interest from government agencies and sponsors, as well as create, hopefully, a sustainable business model. And that's what we're exploring in phase two.
All right, it's fascinating, Neil. We got to take another break, but we'll be back with more on this additive manufacturing. Don't go away. All right, we're back with Neil Oringer of Astro America, the president and co-founder of the company, talking about additive manufacturing and its economic potential for diversifying Guam's economy. So, Neil, tell us what else does the government of Guam need to do? Do we need to, like, for example, establish a industrial park for potential investors and companies to come in? We need, as you were talking about earlier, developing a workforce for our young people to come in and actually be employees of these companies. Tell us a little bit more about that aspect.
Well, sir, you've got some great ideas. We need to sign you up to help us out with this report. This is great. Yeah, absolutely, exactly, all the above. What I've really enjoyed about working with the Guam Economic Development Authority is there's a real earnestness to how are we going to work together to create the right kind of business climate to attract business, but not just try to set up a couple of companies, but to figure out how to sustain this prosperity. And so, yes, figuring out how to, number one, ensure that when companies are looking into whether or not they want to collaborate, that we can convince them that this is actually good business. And so part of it is just an education campaign. Can we make sure people understand about the opportunities that exist from a tax standpoint? What kind of business structures need to be explored to set up a Guam subsidiary or what have you, so that they can benefit from setting up shop in Guam? But yes, there is possibly an opportunity for us to co-invest. Maybe there's an opportunity for Guam to if there's a belief that there's going to be a good return on this investment, then sure, if Guam wanted to put down a little bit of funding that could be matched by the federal government and by private industry, I think that would be welcome. Perhaps for that incubator space I was mentioning, perhaps for some additional support from with the university. But then the other thing that we've really been focused on is, I was told that there are so many people. In fact, we've looked at census data. There are a large set of people, population, people of Guam descent living outside of Guam, and we got to figure out how to make Guam a destination for folks to want to come back to, and to continue to contribute to its economic growth and prosperity. And so I think a campaign to help encourage folks to consider coming to Guam and be part of this revolution, be part of this economic and technological revolution. And I think that's actually possible, but it's going to need considerably a lot of commitment of resources just to do that communication. And I think there's also a lot of interest in this technology, but I think it's going to take a little bit of hard work to really understand what kind of skill sets are going to be needed, and some patience, I would say, because one thing, when I went to Guam in November, I was speaking before the military, I guess it was the American Military Society of Engineers, and somebody asked me, well, how long is this going to take? And I think they wanted me to say, well, maybe a month or two. Unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of building blocks to be laid down. We've got to figure out ways to help advance workforce development and get it done at an early age. And that's going to take some resources and training. But again, I've been really impressed with the sophistication of people in Guam, and also just the desire to do something innovative and interesting. University of Guam has this terrific program, Guam Green Growth. There's a terrific, makerspace in the Chamorro Village we went to. And I was really impressed. There are 3D printers already there making parts. They're helping advising small businesses on how to take advantage of new kinds of technologies. And another interesting thing that I didn't appreciate until I was in Guam, this interest in trying to figure out how to embrace the circular economy, understanding that we need to figure out ways to reduce waste and not create more. Means if we're going to be bringing manufacturing to Guam, we're going to need to figure out what to do. Maybe we can figure out new ways to recycle materials and apply it in a very effective way. And so that's the other thing, is trying to figure out ways to research and to be innovative. And I've been very impressed with some of the entrepreneurs we've gotten to meet along the way. We had an opportunity to meet with folks from a company called Bella Wings, which is a company in Guam that's starting to make real headway in the drone market in Asia. Horrific. I mean, if we can look at this as an opportunity to say, here is an exemplar company that's actually trying to make a difference, and maybe even export to other parts of China, other parts of Asia, that would be terrific. We also have to get the support from large corporations, including United Airlines. And we've really been grateful for folks' willingness to sit down and talk to us about what the art of the possible is. Now we've got to figure out how to do it.
All right. And real quickly, how would you what would you say to encourage young folks to get into the additive manufacturing field and learn about that, so that they could, both if they're in the U.S. mainland and on Guam, to get into the field? And I got to ask this question: is AI going to have any impact on this? Because that's what everybody's talking about right now. AI is going to replace everything.
Yeah, I'll start with the fun stuff first. We'll get to RoboCop and Terminator in a second. So I think that there's a lot that can be done in terms of getting young people into 3D printing. In fact, there's a neat program in Guam, Starbase. It's actually, they're doing some STEM teaching of 3D printing at the National Guard facility there. And I would encourage people to look for other ways to expand 3D printing into the schools. When I started working at 3D Systems, when I got out of government, my daughter, was 8 years old, and I got a desktop 3D printer, just a small little thing, not one of those big factory equipment pieces. And my daughter, I mean, she knows her way around a computer better than I do, as you know. I mean, she's 14 now, but back then, and it was remarkable. I mean, she had a ball learning how to 3D print parts. She went so far as to get a 3D scanner, scanned my wife's head, and then converted that into something that she could 3D print. But first, she took my wife's digital image and she gave her horns, a little mustache, and then she 3D printed. It was a lot of fun. And there are all kinds of programs. You don't have to improvise. There's a great organization called SME, Society of Manufacturing Engineers, SME.org. They're actually getting into the schools early. They have different programs. I would encourage schools to start contacting these nonprofits. They have all kinds of scholarships and ways to fund these kinds of programs and get 3D printers in the schools. On the AI front, I would say AI isn't always a force for bad. And in the case of 3D printing, we're actually using it on the industrial scale. As we take jobs that have been outsourced for years to other places, we're actually bringing them back into the United States by using high-tech 3D printing. So rather than rely on those, I mentioned before, that GE part that's made by 24 different part suppliers, now instead of outsourcing it all over the world, we're bringing it all back into a place where we can 3D print something out of a single box that could be located in Guam. What AI can be used for is making sure that there are fewer flaws. So what we've begun to experiment with is putting cameras into those 3D printers, and as a flaw is being detected, or potential for a flaw to be detected, not only would the sensor alert the user, stop the build, it might actually be able to course correct using machine learning, saying, oh, well, we noticed, the robot might say, I noticed, I calculated last time when you took that printing strategy, this pour or this defect occurred. We're going to course correct and not do that again. And that's the way AI actually can be helpful. But we've really watched and seen additive manufacturing serve as a means to bring jobs back to the United States. I think it's a really great potential to bring jobs into Guam and create a lot of new entrepreneurs, democratize manufacturing, get manufacturing and parts to the point of need, as opposed to us waiting forever to get parts. So I think there's a lot of interesting, exciting opportunities to leverage high tech for good.
All right, so we're going to take one more quick break, and then we'll be back to wrap up the show. Please stay with us. All right, Neil, we got about 30 seconds left. If you can answer this question. Additive manufacturing, the potential for Guam is?
Potential is great, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of dedication and ingenuity and cooperation. And I think we've got that in Guam in droves. So we're really looking forward to working with the people of Guam to figure out how to implement something that will serve the people of Guam for decades to come.
All right, Neil Oringer, the president of Astro America, talking additive manufacturing. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, I'm Nestor LeConte. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again next week on The Hub.